All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Atharva, and welcome back to another episode of the BioFrontier Files. This is episode 9.
And hello, I'm Aditya, and today we're joined by Dr. Brunden.
Hello.
So, Dr. Brunden, why don't you just introduce yourself shortly for our listeners?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Kurt Brunden. I'm a professor at the University of Pennsylvania within the Center for Neurodegenerative Disease Research, where I direct translational research and drug discovery activities. And so essentially, my research focus at Penn is in neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, frontotemporal dementias. And so my group does research trying to understand disease mechanisms and then hopefully leverage that knowledge into trying to come up with therapeutic strategies for these diseases.
And that's great to hear. So, Dr. Brunden, first question for you is very straightforward, and it is, how did you really get introduced and interested into science when you were growing up?
Yeah, well, that's a long time ago, so I have to look back a bit, but starting in elementary school, I enjoyed things like mathematics and, early exposure to biology, and that continued as I went through, junior high school and high school. Probably influenced in part by my family surroundings. My grandfather was a professor in engineering. My father had received a PhD in biostatistics. I came from a family where science and education were valued. By the time I got through high school, I had focused, a lot of my efforts on advanced chemistry courses, math, biology courses. And so I followed that up as I got into college, and as an undergrad dual major, both in what's known as health chemistry and biology with a math minor.
Yeah, sounds good. I guess like a lot of the people we've asked, they mentioned how it started off at a young age and then they eventually sort of got more specific. So as you mentioned, you were more interested in math and chemistry. And then I'm sure that something might have changed, or you might have seen something or got interested in something to really make you want to pursue a PhD in your field of neurodegenerative diseases and drug discovery. So could you talk a little bit more about that? Like what really made you go from this math and chemistry base that you may have had in high school and then those experiences that shaped your passions right now?
Yeah, well, actually, my PhD is in biochemistry, not neuroscience. But that just shows that you can get a degree in a kind of broad area like biochemistry, and then, as you pursue and advance through your career, start to specialize in other areas. But to get to your question, as an undergrad, as I said, I had both biology and chemistry majors, and besides the usual university laboratory courses and things that you take with your normal coursework, I had a unique opportunity to spend my junior year, the last part of my junior year, and all my senior year of college, assisting in a lab in a pharmaceutical company, which at the time was known as Upjohn Company. They got bought by Pfizer ultimately. This is in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where I grew up and went to undergrad at Western Michigan University. And so that experience of working, in a pharmaceutical research laboratory, I had a great mentor there, a fellow named Dr. Paul Sato, who, allowed me a fair amount of autonomy given, where I was in my training and experience at that point. That really solidified to me that I wanted to take the next step and get a PhD. And then it was just a question of, what do I get my PhD in? And, I had a biology major, I had a chemistry major. So if you put the two together, you get biochemistry. And so that's where I ended up in a biochemistry program.
And that makes logical sense. If you've done both, at this point, just combine them and get that PhD.
All right.
So, right? So now, Dr. Brunden, we're going to shift a little bit into what your current research is about. If you could just share that, as well as some of the latest breakthroughs in the field of drug discovery and neurodegenerative disease that you could share.
Yeah, so my research at Penn again is focused on these diseases: Alzheimer's disease, frontotemporal dementia, a little bit of Parkinson's disease. And, the work that I do, I have multiple projects and have had multiple projects in the 17 years that I've been at Penn now, that have been funded by classical NIH grant mechanisms that you may be familiar with. But then also we've done a lot of collaborative work with pharmaceutical companies. So we've worked with many of the large pharmaceutical companies such as Bristol Myers Squibb, Johnson and Johnson, Biogen, others. And so, those projects have kind of spanned a fair area. We've assisted companies like Biogen in characterization of a monoclonal antibody therapy that progressed to clinical testing in Alzheimer's disease and in another disease that's, progressive supranuclear palsy, which is a tauopathy, which is a frontotemporal dementia-like disease. Unfortunately, they didn't have success in the clinic, and so that antibody is no longer being pursued, but that's just an example of one thing that we worked on that went forward. More recently, in an NIH-sponsored program, we've developed a small molecule drug candidate for Alzheimer's disease and also, again, for these other tauopathies, tau being one of the misfolded proteins that's found in Alzheimer's and other diseases. And these drugs that we've identified work by essentially affecting microtubules, which are the kind of the railroad track, if you will. They're a polymer that forms in all cells, but particularly in nerve cells and in the axons of nerve cells. They're very important in things known as axonal transport. And there's evidence that in Alzheimer's disease and some other neurodegenerative diseases that microtubule structure and function is somewhat compromised. And so we've come up with small molecule candidate that seems to normalize microtubule structure and function. We've shown this in mouse models of disease. And so we're now in the process of, it looks like we're going to get NIH funding. It's not official yet, but the score would indicate that we should, the score in our grant, to now proceed into what are known as IND or investigational new drug enabling studies to test this compound for a variety of safety and other factors that you have to do to get ultimately into clinical trials into humans. And so, our hope is that we'll proceed through these IND enabling studies successfully. It's going to take 2 or 3 years to do so, but then if we are successful, then we would have a candidate that could potentially go into human testing.
Wow. Yeah, hopefully that happens. I mean, that would be great for the field and for your work as well. So, of course, I mean, drug discovery, neurodegenerative diseases, it's probably a field that's rapidly changing every day. There's new updates, maybe new drugs coming out, maybe new ideas. So how do you really stay updated with all this stuff that's going on in your field, these latest developments? And how do you even incorporate these into your work if it's so rapidly changing?
Yeah, the field is definitely rapidly changing. There's been some very good news in the Alzheimer's field over the last year or so, in that there's now an approved drug that actually does seem to modify disease progression. It's a therapeutic antibody called Leqembi that is being sold now. It's not a simple drug because it requires patients to get transfusions at the moment, so they have to go to a physician's office. It's not like taking a pill every day, but nonetheless, the clinical trial evidence suggests that it does at least moderately slow disease progression. And that's the first time anything's ever been found for one of these neurodegenerative diseases that appears to be disease modifying. So it's an exciting time. But yeah, there's a lot of changes always going on, a lot of literature, a lot of papers get published. And, you just have to continuously read the literature. There are some good resources that help summarize some of the literature. There's a great website called Al's Forum. I don't know if you guys ever seen that. But if you anyone wanted to look at kind of state of the art and what's happening in the Alzheimer's field, that is a kind of a reporting website, if you will, that gives beautiful synopsis of all the current hot research. So by reading that, you can kind of stay up to speed. It doesn't give you all the details. You have to dig deeper into the papers sometimes to get all the details, but But the bottom line is learning never ends, and you just have to continue to stay up to speed on what's happening through reading, attending scientific conferences, etc.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned that these papers always have to be, you always have to read them, you always have to stay up to date with what's going on. Or, you can fall behind as well with the amount of research that's being published, especially in Alzheimer's, as you mentioned, this new drug that's now there for transfusions. It seems like the field's heading in a very good direction and positive direction for everyone as well in terms of treatment. And so going into our next question now, it is how do you think that the development of improved technology, specifically AI, is impacting, drug discovery and drug models and things like that?
Yeah, I think it's a area that obviously is rapidly changing. I'm certainly not an AI expert, but AI machine learning programs, which are somewhat synonymous in some ways, have already facilitated research in some ways. For example, this isn't specific to neurodegenerative disease, but one of the big challenges that has challenged all biology is understanding protein structure, right? Proteins, of course, are a string of amino acids, and they all fold to unique conformations. And in the past, the only way to get accurate determination of protein structures, which are often very useful for designing drugs, for example, is through getting crystals of the protein and doing what's known as X-ray crystallography. Okay, very slow and tedious process that can often take years. I mean, that's increased in speed as well, but it's not trivial. But now there are computer programs enabled by AI or machine learning that can just take the amino acid sequence of a protein and with a high degree of accuracy predict the 3D structure. And that, it's not 100% accurate yet. It's called AlphaFold is one of the programs, but it's getting to be very accurate. And so that kind of information, because if you have the shape of a protein, so an enzyme, for example, all right, enzymes, as you know, catalyze biological processes. If you have the structure of an enzyme, you can identify what's known as the active site, which is where it does its thing. If it's cleaving another protein or it's facilitating the addition of a phosphate to a glucose or whatever, okay? And if you have the structure of that active site, then you can start doing rational docking studies, molecular docking studies, to try to identify molecules that will interact at that binding site and then block that enzyme activity, which in many cases is what there are enzymes you want to inhibit for various diseases. Okay. And so that's just an example of how AI, both in the determination of putative protein structures, but then using these molecular docking studies that are all again done on a computer, right? Taking virtual small molecules, if you will, and trying to come up with ideas of the small molecules that might work. And that information then allows a chemist a starting point to start synthesizing compounds that look like the ones that were predicted by the software. Okay. So that's just one of many kind of examples where AI is going to have huge impact. As these programs get smarter and smarter, they're going to get more and more accurate at these predictions. And it's going to save a lot of time and money in many cases.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I mean, it's everyone that we've talked to so far has had a different. I thought I was gonna go get his charger. I think his thing's about to die. But yeah,
Okay.
everyone that we've talked to so far has discussed a different aspect that AI is really helping them with. Last week we were talking to a different professor, Dr. Mike Snyder, and he was saying how all these big data sets, it's really hard to just get through all of that manually and all that. So that's what he's gonna be using AI for. You're talking about using it for proteins, like sort of identifying the active sites of enzymes. So definitely that's something that we both think is really promising, and even think it's really going to help in all types of fields. Um, Shifting away like from the technical aspect that we've been asking you, more about just how what is a typical day as a PI and a researcher look like for you?
Yeah. it varies day to day. One thing it's not for someone like me is spending time at the research bench. One of the ironies of a career path like I've taken is, as you have become successful, and you start growing your own lab and you start hiring people, it takes you away as the principal investigator from the laboratory itself, because you're now essentially administrating the science. You're managing the people, you're instructing, coming up with research directions, writing grants, writing papers. But most of my day, frankly, is spent in front of a computer. And I haven't been at a laboratory bench for many, many years, doing hands-on research myself. That's okay. I miss it sometimes, but it doesn't mean I don't know the science. If I had to draw an analogy, I'm kind of like the conductor of an orchestra now, right? I might be able to play one or two instruments, but I can't play them all. But I know how to direct them, and I know when one's out of tune or not playing in rhythm. And so you have to kind of keep all the pieces moving. And of course, you have to bring in the critical thing in academic science is bringing in the funding to support all this research, right? And that means, again, writing good papers, writing grants, and getting dollars in the door to help support all the staff that do work for me. So, as I said, most of my days in front of computers doing some type of computer and or paperwork. And of course, there's always administrative stuff that has to be done as well. There's various rules and regulations we have to follow as far as training, safety training. There's, financial administration of the grant. So I have to, keep track of all that stuff. So, there's a lot of kind of boring stuff, but it's all part of the job.
Yeah, so for all that, so you were mentioning how you have to write a bit of write papers. So you yourself not doing a lot of the bench work. Do you do mainly reviewing of the papers, or how does that really work?
It depends. It depends on the work. I mean, so, the typical people that would work in my laboratory would be obviously technicians, which means that's their kind of full-time job. They're not in school anymore, but this is their job. But then there's graduate students, and then there are what are known as postdocs or postdoctoral fellows who are, doing training after their PhD, kind of like residency for a physician. And depending on whose research it is, if it's a postdoc, then, I would ask them to write the first draft of the paper. Obviously, then there's a lot of review, iterations, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, many times I'll write the papers myself. If it's work that's largely been done by technicians or something, then, I write the papers. I mean, my fingers are always in the papers, even if a postdoc does the first draft, because, they're still learning. There's edits and things that need to be fixed in many cases. But so, yeah. And then there's things like review articles and things that I write that, where you're trying to give a summary of the field or an opinion piece or whatever. And, so there's those types of things. And then, like I said, there's writing grants and, or trying to get money from industry, even where there's research reports. We often, in our collaborations with industry partners, we typically have research reports that are due on a 6-month, sometimes even quarterly basis, right? And I have to prepare those. So, there's always something to write. Yeah.
All right, I think we finished that section quite nicely. And I like what you said that there's always something to write. There's always something to do. It doesn't matter, what stage you are in your career. You're still going to be involved in the research aspect somehow, some way.
That's right.
And so looking at the beginning of research, usually in high school or when still in school, what are your recommendations for someone who's in school, specifically high school or maybe in college, trying to get into research? What do you recommend for them?
Well, I think the first thing you do is you want to take the coursework that's available to you in your high school, right? And, I think a lot of high schools, certainly the high school I went to way back when, would have chemistry labs, biology labs that, were associated with the coursework. That's really the best place to get first exposures, right? Now, there are some opportunities depending on the university or whatever, and how close, a student might be to a university, for potential summer camp type experiences or even summer internship type experiences. Now, I will say that in my group and in, I think our center more generally, we don't typically take high school students, and there's multiple reasons for that. One is they just haven't had the coursework yet to kind of, be contributors, if you will. But frankly, some of it has nothing to do with that. There's also now these state, laws that require under 18 students, you have to go through FBI checks and everything else for every person working with the student. And so it becomes, just a logistical problem, right? So, so it is a little bit hard sometimes for high school students to land, excuse me, a summer position. But as soon as they turn 18, then that can change. But again, it's what I really recommend is that they just do well in their coursework. Try to do, maybe there's a science advanced project that can be done while in high school, and then get into a good college, and that's when you're really going to start to get the experience, because again, almost all the biology and chemistry and those types of courses that you would take in college will have labs associated with them. And then once you're in college, particularly a college where there's a fair amount of active research, then undergraduates can often participate in research. And we, again, at Penn now, we have a lot of undergrads that work in the labs, okay? And so that's really the time, I think, when you can really start exploring, not only the coursework, but then, what it's really like to be in a research lab. And, that's, I think, as I told you, in a way, for me, it was a pharmaceutical company, but I mean, that's what kind of crystallized for me the idea that I wanted to get a PhD. And I think, that opportunity as an undergrad is important for everyone to kind of get a sense of what they might want to do.
I think that's honestly very good advice for most high school students, because I can tell many kids are very ambitious and they try to get these things that I know they can't handle. This it's just too much for them. It's not even a problem that they don't. It's a problem that they don't know. It's out of their reach. It's advanced things. I like your advice. How you're saying just stick to what you can
The
put on your plate
fundamentals.
and do well. Stick to your fundamentals and do well. That's the basically the most fundamental advice.
It's really true. I mean,
Yeah.
you get into college, you're going to have all kinds of opportunities. And so the best thing you can do is get the good grades and everything that
Yeah.
gets you into college. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So Dr. Brunden, last question. And it's simply, what do you do for fun?
I actually have a fair number of hobbies. I'm a regular exerciser. I've run for 40 some years. I still manage to run, not too fast anymore, but I still get out there. Do some cycling. So I try to stay healthy for both body and mind, if you will. But then, I enjoy things like photography. I dabble in guitar playing. Again, not well, but enough I can play a few songs and entertain myself anyway. And then obviously I have a son who's now a high school teacher, a wife. So there's family things we do, and love going out to have dinners at restaurants and things like that. So I keep myself pretty occupied outside of work.
Yeah, seems like a great thing to be. I need to start cycling and start running. That's my goal for this summer. But
Just be
yeah,
careful on the roads if you're cycling.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's this summer's goal. But yeah, that's great. I mean, it's always good to do a bunch of other stuff. So thank you so much for joining our podcast. I mean, learned a lot. I mean, I'm gonna look into AlphaFold. I mean, I remember you mentioned that, so something cool to look into. And thank you so much for your insights.
It's been a pleasure, and good luck as you end the school year.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Thank
for your
you.
time. Have a nice day.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.